am Dr. Brian Sims. I'm with NASHBID, and I'm pleased and honored to be your host today for this next Crisis Jam. And an interesting Crisis Jam because it seems to parallel what I've gone through before, which is I was the host just before we went on a hiatus a couple of weeks. So I'm not taking it personally, but I'm just kind of looking at it as maybe with Christmas coming and the week afterwards, this is the last jam for this year. So let's go ahead and get things going. This first slide really is more of an acknowledgement of what is yet to come. We're going to have a further discussion during our feature presentation about access for people with intellectual disabilities as well as developmental disabilities. And it is a fascinating topic, and we are chock full of information today. So you'll see me kind of move a little bit faster through the process because I really want to hear this feature presentation as it goes forward. And next slide, please. And great. As you all have seen from many weeks before, we are looking at a growing list here. We're now at the highest participation level at over 3,200 individuals in participating. But one other thing I want you to see is on the far right, in our most featured presentation where we had a number of Zoom participants, as you see all the way over on the right at 425, for the first time, the YouTube has now exceeded that. So we're now seeing a lot of attention being paid to that and become one of the highest pieces. And as a reminder again to everyone to please let us know if your name or organization is not a part of this listing. We'll be happy to add it at any point in time. Karen will place the information in there on how to do so in our chat box. Let's go to the next slide, please. All righty, and for any of you that this may be affecting, there are ways to get it back on your calendar. I know this happened to me as well, so, and I'm not tech savvy, so I still have to go out to the link and come in, but we'll make sure that if you are not able to do so, you can actually access this and download it and import it into your calendar system. And once you're finished doing all of that, please send me an email so I know how to do it. Going to the next slide, this is now the actual site, it's like talk.crisisnow.com site. Want to raise your awareness that again, that as you go into the site, it's rich with information. At the top right, you'll see the learning community. You can access that and achieve a ton of additional information. But what I also want to do is point out in the bottom left about promoting 988 with the t-shirts. And again, we'll mention more about t-shirts a little bit later on, but this is another access point where you're able to get that information. And then below it, of course, is all the information about previous episodes and being able to access information from previous times that we've had it, as well as trivia hot seat questions or otherwise, rich with information. And next slide, please. Now, these are just some information from Vibrant, and it's interesting. Vibrant is announcing Dr. Tia Doyle, who's now going to serve as the Chief 988 Suicide and Crisis Line Officer, and she is taking the place of Dr. Don Draper, who has moved on. But here's the wonderful thing about all of this is that she's coming on board. And she is a regular participant in our Crisis Jam. So congratulations. I also want to send congratulations out from us to Kelly Clark, who's going to serve as the Vice President of 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So congratulations to both of them. Moving next, there are a couple of articles that I'm just going to give you a reference to so that when you have time, you can kind of review. This was an article a few weeks ago that spoke on New York City's involuntary removing folks from streets. The next article that comes up actually talks a bit more on, and it's just a couple of days ago on New York Times, about a similar topic area. So when you have time, review it. And we'll probably reference it at some point in the future, but it's something where you can look at and go ahead and go forward with additional information. So next slide, please. All righty, and from CARF International, here's a slide where there is a request for your input regarding standards for children and youth service crisis programs. And all you have to do is access their site and follow the link. And they're looking at completing this review and having you do it by this Monday coming, December the 19th. Next slide, please. All righty. And yesterday, as you well, for some of you, we had a wonderful convening of 988 with SAMHSA. And this young man was a part of this and just a phenomenal individual. And Arvin really spoke. And one of the quotes that came from him was something we wanted to highlight today. He says, the response to a person having a mental health crisis has always been to blame, shame, and criminalize instead of to love, care, and empathize. Finally, we have solutions that provide dignity, safety, and real recovery, and that need not begin or end with crisis. It was so phenomenal. He was such a great speaker, and we're really thankful to him for there yesterday, and are honored to use this quote for today's Crisis Jam. And let's move to the next slide. So we are now at our feature presentation, and I am happy to announce that our speakers for today are both Leigh Davis as well as Carlean Ponder, and we're going to speak on the crisis response with people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. So I'm going to first turn it over to Leigh Davis. Welcome, and thank you for being a part of the Jam.
Thank you, Dr. Sims. And this is a great opportunity to be part of something that clearly has such a great following in terms of looking at 988, not only nationally, but internationally. And we are just excited to be a part of it. And we want to bring the lens of people with IDD more specifically to 988 today. And my name is Leigh Davis, and I'm the Senior Director of Disability and Justice Initiatives at the ARC of the United States, and have been working in this area for 26 years, working at the ARC of the US. And so in some of our work on another project, we were in Pittsburgh, where some folks who attend Crisis Jam said, this needs to be on the agenda. So that's how we got here. But we also work with NAMI and others in this space. So we're just thrilled to be here. Carlean, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Sure. Hi, I'm Carlean Ponder, Director of Disability Rights and Housing Policy for the ARC of the United States. I do a lot of work on civil rights issues and, of course, criminal justice as it relates to the intersection of people with disabilities, particularly Black people and other people of color with disabilities is a huge part of that work.
Thank you, Carlean. And we'll go to the next slide. And I'm just going to give you an overview of our National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability, so you kind of get an idea of what we've been doing in this space. And then Carlean's really going to focus on the 988 piece, because coming from the policy team, that's really what she focuses on. So I oversee our National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability. We've been around for 9 years now. We provide training and technical assistance on all things related to people with IDD in the criminal justice system. We have a nationwide information referral line where we reach out to families, attorneys, police, others who are needing assistance in this space. And we've created our National Pathways to Justice training, which is a one-day training plus program that creates disability response teams. And we do a number of different projects with federal funding, as well as supports from foundations. Next slide. And just to kind of set this up, as Carlean was mentioning, one of the key topics that we're really interested in is looking at the BIPOC community as they are intersecting with disability and the criminal justice system. And so you may be familiar with some of this research, but we wanted to bring it to you anyway, just in case. Between 1/3 and 1/2 of people are shot and killed by police. They have a disability. We don't have the national data coming necessarily from the federal government on this, but this is coming from media accounts. And some of the smaller studies that we've seen, one is an example from Macaulay in 2017 that found that young people with disabilities are 13% more likely to be arrested than their peers without disability. But then when we look at Black youth with disabilities, that figure actually jumps to 17%. And people with disabilities have an overall 43% chance of arrest, with a disproportionate risk falling on young Black men. And we'd like to see more data around this that pertains specifically to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so with that, Carlean, you want to take it from here?
Yes. So I have the privilege of working with one of our partners out of Illinois, Access Living, a disability rights group. And they organized pretty heavily and got some major changes in the state of Illinois after this shooting of this young man, Stephon Watts, a 15-year-old with autism, Calumet City in Illinois. And he had, he was living with his parents and had police called on multiple occasions. Generally because, there's just no other option for folks when their teenagers particularly are having a crisis. And so on, this one particular occasion, officers showed up to the home. As I understand it, at least one of the officers, I think, the officer who fired first was familiar with the young man and had gone to the home before. But this time, Stephon had a knife. I think his parents said it was maybe a kitchen knife. It could have been something like a butter knife even. But, once the officers saw that, their reaction was to fire. And so they shot multiple times. And this young man was killed in front of his family. And, many, many things wrong with that, especially the fact that the officers were very familiar with this youth and had been called to the home before and didn't have a better plan of de-escalation. But Stephon's story is not uncommon. I think it's important because when we talk about intellectual and developmental disabilities and people with disabilities, we generally focus on the mental health side when we're talking about crisis and, of course, calling 988. But for people like Stephon and even for his family and caregivers, this is a potential resource if it's done in a way where folks with these types of disabilities feel connected and served. So as we understand it, SAMHSA has not directly addressed the unique needs of people with IDD. There are certain things that people would need to know up front, particularly those who are getting calls in, being able to talk in a way that people can understand. We refer to something called plain language when we are communicating with our participants, adjusting the pace of the call, limiting the number of ideas or themes that are addressed in a call, again, using, very basic rather than abstract concepts, and reducing complexity in language are all things that would be very helpful. Best practice is to provide some basic awareness training for all 988, hotline operators. That's, whether they're answering calls in their existing communities or whether these are the 988 hubs. And to do that, we suggest working with providers who are experts on working with people who have IDD. And an example of that is Virginia's REACH program. Next slide, please. So Virginia's REACH program is actually set up to work specifically with people who have IDD. It's they operate a 24-hour crisis hotline that people can call. Again, the issue with that was having a very long number, not a simple 3-digit number that people could remember easily. So you'd have to know that number. So we're hoping that we get something, set up where 988 can directly feed into providers such as REACH when they're talking to somebody who has IDD. I know that there are some challenges in identifying when you are talking to somebody who has an intellectual and developmental disability. So again, that's why we recommend that it would be great to really do this type of training with folks who are experts. I know the REACH program does training internally on a regular basis for their own staff who answer calls and do some of the work. So they have certain techniques that they use themselves to try and identify when they're, speaking with somebody who has a particular disability, because, people may present differently. Some people may be more, some people may have a larger vocabulary than others, and some people may have, a different ability to comprehend than others. And it may not be apparent immediately that you are talking to somebody who has IDD, but, if it starts to develop, for example, if they give you clues like, I live in a group home, just little things like that, that you'd have to be trained to sort of pick up on it would then be really helpful if we could get a type of pilot program where, you know, folks are connected immediately to experts with IDD. And these are, you know, these are all questions that we have. With the REACH program, for example, I don't believe that they've received any additional funding, you know, to expand their crisis services, whether that's taking phone calls or whether that is placing people in temporary homes, which they can do, but they have a very limited number of beds. So if we were to talk about some sort of pilot program, you know, we would also need to consider the implications for funding needs and staffing needs. So these are all questions that I think we should consider and try and answer, you know. Thank you. So some of the things that people would need to know: how are callers with, you know, IDD being identified? Are callers with IDD being identified? I think that it, you know, as I talked about before, I think it would be pretty difficult to do for an average hotline operator unless there was some specific training that, you know, gave them clues to doing that. What forms of training have taken place to help hotline operators identify such callers? I am not aware of any particular initiative around IDD. Some folks are putting things in the chat, which might be helpful. I'd like to hear about a little bit later. It would be great if, you know, we made sure that all of our providers, all of our local providers who are taking 988 calls had that same type of training and were competent when answering calls, either from folks with IDD themselves or family members or caregivers who may also need some crisis services because of the stress sometimes of working or living with somebody who is having a crisis and they've also got an intellectual developmental disability. Are there any data collection points for 988 right now around metrics, you know, for folks with disabilities? Are we, you know, making an effort with the national hotline to identify callers who may need, you know, specialized services in order to be able to de-escalate that type of crisis that they're calling in for at the moment? I mean, all of these things would be very helpful for us to know as we consider how to make this hotline available to lots of different populations who could benefit rather than having calls go into 911 and seeing more, you know, more results as we did with Stefan Watts in Calumet City once 911 becomes involved and unfortunately sometimes resort to violence. So 988 and outreach to specific populations. We know that, you know, SAMHSA has done certain pilot programs. There's been a lot of news, I think, about the pilot program with the Trevor Project and specifically working with them to get some hotline services to youth who identify as LGBTQI+. You know, what components would be necessary to have a similar pilot program for people with disabilities, and that includes people who identify with IDD. Such partnerships could do a lot. I mean, we could have partnerships specifically working with youth who have IDD, adults who have IDD. I would recommend that, you know, we do something similar as is being done with groups like the Trevor Project, that we find organizations like the REACH program and others around the country who have that expertise that's already there and we can benefit from at the national level. Next slide. Thank you. So, you know, I heard about another specialized program. It might have been, I know Washington State has done something around youth and expanding mobile crisis teams as part of their sort of 988 package, but I think I also heard that they were also doing I think a pilot program with Native Americans as well, where, you know, you can call into, I guess if you call 988, you can get an option to press an extension, and then you are connected to culturally competent Native American hotline operators. So, those are the types of innovations that I think would be really helpful when we're trying to expand Native and Strong. Yes, somebody said Native and Strong. Yes. So those are the types of innovations that we'd like to see for the disabled population as well. So we recommend, partnering with a specific IDD provider because they've got the specialized hotline assistance. We also recommend making sure that additional ground supports are available, and doing what we can to make sure that our federal lawmakers and our state lawmakers understand that this is a continuum, and that there may be people who need more than the hotline can provide, and we need mobile crisis units for folks who can be stabilized, maybe in their homes versus going to a hospital or, unfortunately, sometimes jail. This for special consideration of Black, Indigenous, people of color, youth who are foster care involved or otherwise involved with a government system. We recommend taking a look at this video that was led by young people and people who advocate on behalf of young people with disabilities. There are some special considerations there, especially when you're talking about mandatory reporters. Some considerations that we may not always identify up front, but making sure that families aren't harmed in the process of providing crisis care. So cultural competency, very important for lots of different communities. That includes folks with IDD. One thing to be aware of is that, we do know that people of color may avoid calling 988 due to the potential for law enforcement involvement in crisis responses calls. This was covered in a National Council on Disabilities report that highlighted some of the unfortunate incidents where callers received visits from law enforcement that were perhaps premature and put them at risk for certain things, put them at risk for, arrest, for hospitalization. And in some cases, people received bills for services that they did not want. So
And
that is something to
Carlean,
be.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe just another minute or so.
We're done.
Okay, thank you.
I would just say, if people want to look at the slides, there's a few more just on some resources. So if you want to just go through, that one is about our 988. Carlean held a national online conference around 988 and BIPOC. And we've got links to that. This is some of the work we've done with Council of State Governments Justice Center. We're looking at understanding 988 and people with IDD. So we just wanted to leave those as resources with you, and a few more resources there. So I'm assuming people can get these later on, and then our contact information.
Yes. And listen, thank you to both of you for doing the amazing, I guess, successfully completing the amazing task of giving a lot of valuable information in such a compressed period of time. I would like to thank you to both of you. Carlean, great, wonderful presentation, tremendous information. But I also want to thank you both for being so available in the chat room, because as you can tell from the comments that were made in the chat room, there was a lot of rich resources that were added within there. I think there was maybe one question that talked about the REACH program, whether it was affiliated possibly with the National Center for START Services.
I don't know, Carlean, do you know that? We actually had START at our national convention this year in Denver, Colorado, and they spoke at one of our sessions. I don't know if they're affiliated. Do you know, Carlean?
No, REACH is a Virginia developmental disabilities program across the state. And I know they are doing some work with 988 in the state of Virginia, but I don't think that it's as fully streamlined as we would like to see. I don't think that they have done IDD training across the state with the centers that are going to be answering calls. And it would be great if people, were able to just connect immediately to reach once they identified somebody with IDD in crisis.
Well, thank you. Thank you again. We're going to move to the roundtable discussion, and we are privileged today to have two individuals, very high standing, Adrian Johnson from the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, and Dr. Sasamolo Shirika, a very, very good friend who I'm pleased to see at this particular point. Dr. Shirika is the CMO with the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disabilities. Gentlemen, we have a few moments of comment from either one of you. Who would like to start?
Thank you for that outstanding presentation, and Dr. Sims, thank you for that very kind introduction. I was just taking notes. This is such a topical issue. I think a couple of thoughts or a couple of comments. The first is, I think for certain, all that's been described with respect to ensuring that at the front door, which is 988. That teams are prepared and are aware and sensitive to the needs of this population, able to identify individuals when they call for help, and there's a whole communications on and so on that will go into that. But I just want to leave the point that make the point that there is an entire system of care that has to be built out behind that front door. An entire system of care. One of the things we're seeing in Philadelphia as we expand our crisis system is it appears that the number of people presenting with these needs, behavioral health, intellectual disability, behavioral health and intellectual disability needs might be growing. And that's obviously consistent with the national data on the increase in individuals diagnosed with autism, for example. Now, what we find is these folks sadly very often fall between the cracks, either because there is not an ideal disposition plan for them, or other reasons, or there's sometimes it's a problem that their needs are so complex, trauma, ID, and so on, that there's simply not an ideal disposition plan. So just want to leave us with the I think the reflection that absolutely, as we build out the capability on the front end with 988, we have to think about building out the rest of the services. So the REACH program is a good example. In Philadelphia now, we've looked at across our system and built out a plan for a system of care for individuals with intellectual disabilities and behavioral health needs. We've actually also reached out to the START program, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be on the Crisis Jam Hollywood Squares today. I think first and foremost, it was an excellent presentation, and it just reiterates some of the integral parts of why Georgia decided to do a blended mobile crisis team. And it all started back when we started looking at the standpoint first of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and looking at do our policies and do our practices actually align? And the presenter made some excellent points around cultural sensitivity, diversity, insight, and just general knowledge around how that means higher quality and better outcomes for the people that we support across all disability groups. And within our mobile crisis teams, we value cross-training with respect to staff and receiving training and rendering culturally appropriate care regardless of age, race, disability, ethnicity, or crisis, or the level of the crisis that is for that particular person in crisis. And we expect all of our teams to be competent into responding to individuals above the age of 4, of course, who are in crisis, regardless of the origin of the crisis, and also to ensure that there's an appropriate crisis response specific to those subpopulations, no matter what they are. Georgia specifically requires board certified behavior analysts to be a consultative part of all crisis response teams with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and also to expect that to complement at a later point in time for their behavior support needs moving forward in the aftermath of the actual crisis. So again, great points, collaboration, and in partnership with our Office of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, really being partners, not just saying we're partners, but actually looking at what it takes for the policy to match the actual action or the response that happens at a local level in the communities, as well as our mobile crisis and our crisis response call centers.
Wow. Well, thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Dr. Cervenka, and especially thanks out to Carlean and to Leanne. Spectacular presentation filled with information. I would reference you all to take a look in the chat box when you will. It is rich with information. And if you have additional questions or otherwise, please don't hesitate to post them in the chat box going forward, and we'll try our best to get information back to you. But again, thank you to all of the panelists and our roundtable discussants. Let's move to the next item on our agenda. And it's a reminder again about our t-shirts, which is now expanded. We're no longer looking at t-shirts by themselves. We're looking at now short and long sleeve shirts, as well as mugs and other memorabilia. A reminder that you can order it directly, or if you want to be in the crisis hot seat, we'll give you an item. If you want to host it, we'll give you an item. So take that into consideration and let Karen or Dave or anyone within the Crisis Jam Network know that you would like to be a part of that, either from hot seat or otherwise, and we'll be happy to push one your way. Moving to the next element, it's regarding something that Dave Covington and Dr. Brian Hepburn had suggested about taking a lead and investing in community crisis response in the continuum. That was held back in September of 2019. And it's really to raise awareness that we have a lot of international involvement. And at that particular conference, I believe there were maybe 8 nations that were involved. Next slide, please. All righty, we have now made it to the Crisis Trivia Hot Seat. And I'm going to be calling on my friend again. I have to call him my friend because after doing all of this too, I'm not sure if he stays my friend, but Dr. Cervenka has graciously agreed to be on the hot seat today for today's trivia hot seat question. So Dr. Cervenka, thank you again for being so gracious and coming in here. Let's just quickly go to it. Innovation and the first follower. Okay, in 1968, the United States was the second country to implement a 3-digit emergency universal hotline with 911, with, of course, UK being the first with a 999 number in 1937. So your question, Dr. Cervenka, on November 30th, 2023, a second country will launch 988. And what country would it be? Would it be A, Australia, B, Canada, C, New Zealand, or D, Switzerland? And you have several options, sir. We're going to post this out for the entire audience so that they can answer it. You'll see the question in front of you. We ask you to place your answer. And Doc, you can either answer directly, or you can wait on the audience and count on them, or you can even call a person if you feel the need to. So let me turn to you.
Can I call you? Just kidding. My answer is B, Canada.
Okay. And it sounds pretty rock solid for you. And I would say that based on the trivia hot seat respondents, they seem to be heavily fortified in that regard too, with almost 75% of them in agreement. So your final answer, sir, is Canada, correct? All righty. Well, let's see if you are correct. So, and you are indeed, sir. So what I want to do, and thank you, Dr. Cervenka, and remember to let Karen and us know what you would like in terms of the crisis t-shirt. You are spot on, wonderful. If we could go to the next slide. I'm going to bring in at this point, John Palmieri from SAMHSA, who's going to guide us through the next few slides. And thanks again, John, for stepping up to this.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Good to be here. So yeah, the trivia question kind of sparked a little bit of a a conversation about what's happening kind of on the international front with respect to crisis services, 988 activity, and so forth. And I'll talk just for a moment after these couple of slides on what SAMHSA has been engaged in with the Canadian government with respect to 988 implementation, but just kind of quickly wanted to profile some activity around the world on crisis response. And we know, and I don't think Richard's on the call, but he probably would be able to provide a lot more sort of rich detail on the work within the UK. Obviously, there's been a 999 system for emergency situations in existence for many years, going back to 1937. And then in 2010, the creation of the 3-digit 111 code, which in the UK does not currently distinguish between physical or mental health crisis situations. I think there is a desire to have there be a more specialized or dedicated sort of stream of work related to 111, but currently as it's organized in the UK, this is more of a combination response for people with either physical or mental health concerns. Next slide, please. In Australia, again, kind of the 3-digit 000 for emergencies, been in existence since the 60s. And also you can see here that there was the creation of Lifeline Australia in 1963 to provide 24/7 crisis support. And you can see some of the branding and marketing there. And then of course, we've talked a lot about the history of 911, also going back in this country to the 60s, the advent of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline back in 2005 through the 800 number. And then of course, most recently, the transition to the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline on July 16th of this year. And for those of you who are not aware, this is work that's well underway in Canada as well, so that their plan will be to implement 988, the same 3-digit code, in Canada by November 30th of 2023. Canada has had similarly a 911 emergency dispatch line since 1972. They have had the Talk Suicide Canada line that you can see there since 2002. And then in a very kind of similar trajectory, building out 988 across the network of Canada to support suicide and crisis services. And so we have contingent from SAMHSA was actually in Canada, in Ottawa, perhaps about a month ago, to talk with them about some of the implementation challenges, successes, some of their planning processes. Interestingly enough, I mean, I think what they're experiencing is a lot of the same questions, strategic decisions that certainly we have faced here. And so I think that there is a great opportunity for bi-directional learning with the Canadian government and beyond Canada. So this really isn't just about Canada. We know that worldwide, there's tremendous morbidity and mortality related to mental and substance use disorders. And there are also tremendous opportunities for shared learning around standard setting, around building outcomes data, improving the evidence base. And there's lots of ways that we can continue to partner with our international community moving forward. So very excited about those opportunities. I'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
All righty, and thank you, John, for that overview. Really appreciate that information. Going to move on to the promise of 988. And Diana, if you are on, if you could give us a quick overview of Live Lens. We are so thankful to have you on board with us today.
Hello, yes, I am. And I am glad to be here. I am a multiple suicide attempt survivor and a Latina. And so today I'm coming in that part of my life and story. As a Latina growing up here in the US, I knew about, fortunately I spoke English, so I didn't have a language barrier, but because of my culture, I had a lot of more struggles with actually talking about my mental health and suicidality, and wasn't able to, or never actually felt like I could use the lifeline. In those times it was a lifeline. And so I'm thinking that for now, for 988, for the crisis, what we can do for Latinos here in the US, both the children of them and the immigrants who are possibly here for the first time, is that that we can address what the number is, what exactly it is in Spanish, of course, and either in ads or to put it out there to educate Latinos here in the U.S. on what the line, what will happen when they do call, having maybe some kind of advertising for that shows people that look like us who are using this number, suggesting they practice making a call first to find out what the process is once they do call. And also to make sure that we have enough Spanish speaking operators and resources once they do call that line. But I think it's going to be really important for 988 to envelop the Latino community by letting them know what exactly, so there's no more fear of the unknown, and so that they actually use the number. I know for me, I was in the behavioral health, mental health system for about over 20 years, and I never once used the crisis line. So I think it's really important. It could have made a big difference in my story, and I think it will for sure in the Latino community going forward.
Wow. And Diana, I want to personally thank you for bringing that lens to our collective awareness. I mean, it really is necessary information for us to have at our disposal. I want to also congratulate you because you were one of the most inspiring speakers back a few years ago at the White House, at the first White House Summit, we recall, on lived experience and peer support. So just you are absolutely on target, and we so much thank you and appreciate your coming in and sharing that information with us. And very much we hope for your journey forward to be wonderful.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And let's move now to our crisis talk. And today we're going to bring in Christy Malik, my colleague from Nashville, who is going to introduce us to the speaker.
Great, thanks, Brian. So my colleague Millie Ezekiel and I had the great pleasure of interviewing Elizabeth Kajar. She is the former project director at Common Ground Resource and Crisis Center, which is located in Pontiac, Michigan. And we wanted to find out a little bit more about their Follow-Up Connect program. So Elizabeth, are you with us? Yes, great. Thanks for joining us. So it was very fascinating to learn about Common Ground's follow-up program in that it connects with follow-up services for an entire year. So, and it was very interesting to learn some of the touch points that occur and the benefits of following somebody during that one-year trajectory. So Elizabeth, you know, while we were interviewing you, you talked about, you know, the touch points that occur. How does Follow-Up Connect ensure people outreach in 988 in Michigan have access to the right resources?
Well, first and foremost, it's really important on every single call that we do with individuals is we are making reference to 988 as a possible resource for them to receive further crisis intervention from, if that's something that comes up from them. And then our follow-up services are really based on the individual needs of each person. So we are really talking about what barriers they're experiencing and what resources they have in that particular moment. And then we're doing a quick search while we're in the throes of that communication with them to connect them to those right resources, or even to remind them of the resources that they've already been connected to, and addressing why they have not been able to link with that particular resource that they previously were connected to. So it's really a service where we are very person-centered and in addressing the individual needs of the person that we're on the call with at the time.
Yeah, great. And how do you see follow-up services, you know, really fitting into the role within 988 crisis systems?
Well, as we know, many individuals that are experiencing any type of suicide ideation or high levels of anxiety and depression, or that have had interactions with law enforcement, hospitals, inpatient treatment centers, they often just need someone to reach out to connect and talk with. And so in times although we have our scheduled points and times that we are contacting these individuals to provide some of this type of connection and check in on them and review their safety plans and have those types of dialogues, there are those moments in between those scheduled calls that they just need someone. And that is where then we reference 988 and make sure that they have that as a resource and feel comfortable accessing that call with them. If we need to, we can immediately connect a person and stay on a line with them to 988. So that's an option that we've tried to utilize as well.
Yeah, great. Well, it was such a pleasure interviewing you. And we really encouraged crisis jammers to read the crisis talk article, because one of the things that we learned was how Elizabeth was really collaborating with law enforcement and hospital systems to really ensure that people get the right level of care that they need. So again, it was such a pleasure interviewing you. So, and again, a special thanks goes out to my colleague, Leigh Ezekiel, who really shepherded the writing of this article. Thanks again.
And
so Brian, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Christy. And again, we want to echo our thanks to you and to Neely for the development of the article. And Elizabeth, again, thank you so much for being part of this particular panel. We'll move now next to our SAMHSA report. And John, if you'll come back on again, sir.
Oh, thanks, Brian. I lost track of time. Yeah, happy to be back here. Thank you to everybody on the call and beyond. Just wanted to, I know many of you were a part of our convening over the past couple of days, but extremely appreciative of all the partnership leadership that made these past 2 days incredibly rich and dynamic, with an opportunity to continue to refine and share vision for moving forward, building lots of momentum on off of the 988 transition, looking at ways to extend conversations and partnerships, looking at commercial payer partners, technology company partners, and thinking very clearly about next steps moving into 2023 that we can build upon. Also extremely appreciative. I know you mentioned this earlier, Brian, with Arvind and the comments that he made at the top of the convening yesterday, and the way that conversations on lived experience and expertise were woven in throughout the discussions. Similarly, even though we had a dedicated panel discussion on equity, really emphasizing again the importance of weaving equity into everything that we're doing, workforce, technology, data, and communication, so that we're not actually marginalizing the equity conversation, but we're really integrating it in all of our planning and strategic thinking about crisis services. Tremendously proud and awe of the dialogue, expertise, and engagement throughout the past couple of days. And as I mentioned in our pre-call, I have a list of about 50, 75, maybe 100 things that I'm really excited to take into action moving into January. So thank you all so much. A special shout out to NASHBID and to McKinsey Health Institute and all the planning partners who made it such a huge success. So thank you.
Well, John, we wanted to definitively thank you and thank SAMHSA for its extensive leadership and just the vision that you all have in terms of moving this lens forward. So we're honored to be a part of that continuum and look forward to where we head next. So thank you again. Now let's move now to the NASHBID update. And today we have Arlene Stevenson with us. Arlene?
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Hi, Brian. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk to you today about two new NASHBID resources that we've just developed. The first one is called the State-by-State Legislative Analysis of Funding for 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifelines. And this is an analysis in a chart form that provides a description of and all of the appropriations for the 2022 state legislation and budget activity. And when I say that, it's appropriations and enacted bills that are related to the funding for the lifelines throughout the country. It also provides links to those bills and budgets. I want to tell you that it's posted on our website today, and it is, but we just discovered that we have a link problem. So we're going to have to pull it down, but we will repost it. The second resource is, and you're familiar with this from last year, the 988 model bill. We've updated it for 2023. It's on the NASHBID website. It might be in the chat. And there's also a link on the slide. This is a great resource because it's been designed as a template for the states to use. They can use it in all or part, whatever works for them. You'll notice it when you open it that it has track changes on it. And that's not a mistake. It's intentional because this is language that is in statute already in many of the states' statutes. And we're revising parts of it. So we want them to be able to identify what it is quickly and to make it easy for them to use it. Then there's also new language for 2023. This is toward the end of the bill. It's set up as add-ons actually, and it's easy to identify it because we've highlighted all those sections that are new. The topics that we've added are behavioral health parity, behavioral health equity, also a requirement for state and to have a state or local committee to coordinate development of response protocols for 988, 911, the PSAPs, and the police. There's also a section on financial sustainability. There is a section on the new national guidelines for youth, young people, and families that came to us from SAMHSA. And it also requires Medicaid programs to provide billing and coding assistance for providers and COs in the state. And we think this will help improve reimbursement rates. So I wanted to thank all the partners who gave us their input and multiple reviews of these documents so that we're all on the same page. Thank you.
Carlean, thank you so much. And thank you for so eloquently unpacking all of this information. It's a lot to absorb, but it is wonderful information nevertheless. Thank you, and thank NASHBID.
Thank you. Okay, thanks.
We move now to our federal updates, and Sarah, if you are available.
Thank you so much, Brian. So the breaking news out of Washington, D.C. is that top appropriators have reached an agreement on a framework for the FY23 appropriations bills, also known as an omnibus when they're all brought together. So we have no details about what yet will make it into the FY23 bills, but this is an important step in the right direction. And this bill would serve as a vehicle for any potential mental health policy work that could be attached to it before the end of this year, which is the end of the Congress. On this slide here, we've got what policies are on the table for potential attachment to any sort of omnibus bill that could make it over the finish line. Not all of these will make it, but we have heard in particular that the mobile crisis team reimbursement, either through Medicare or Medicaid, it's not clear as of which, could be very much included, and it seems to be one of the priorities that's in the mix. So more to come, and hopefully by the time we all regather next year, we'll have a really big holiday omnibus together that brings us some hopefully crisis care developments and extra funding.
Oh, Sarah, thank you so much. And thank you for keeping us updated. Because with things breaking as they are, it's wonderful to have you available to kind of keep us where things are and where potentially they can move. So thank you so much for that info. Let's move to the next segment. And I'd like to ask at this time, Steph, if you'll come on and speak a little bit on the 988 states.
Sure, thanks, Brian. So no specific legislation to discuss today, but just wanted to offer our excitement that there's going to be an updated version of the model bill that's available for 2023 state sessions, which are of course just around the corner. I speak with a lot of folks who are leading 988 advocacy campaigns, and we've seen that model bill just be such a helpful starting point for their efforts. And I know we've seen about 25 states or more introduce something on 988 at their state houses. And overwhelmingly, we see that model bill as the foundation of those efforts. And I will say, just kind of turning to look at 2023, I think even more states are in good position to act, with 988 being live at this point. I think they're all gaining a much clearer picture of the resources and policy changes necessary to support 988. And hopefully that'll translate to even more legislation in the new year.
And Stephanie, what I really like about this portion is really projectively, I think what we're all looking at is that when we started the whole concept with the implementation of 988, we were looking at trying to get it going. This is really helpful information as to how to sustain it. Where is it going? What's going to happen tomorrow and the months ahead? So this is information that is invaluable and a reminder to each of us that it hasn't stopped. It's merely begun, and it is now moving in a direction that hopefully will grow a lot further than even it is at the time. So Stephanie, thank you so much for that info. And let's move now to our next slide. I think with that intro, okay, and with that music, which I did not provide, it's my pleasure to bring in Armstrong to give us some strong talk, sir.
Thank you, sir. And that is actually the theme music for the Strong Talk podcast. So at a later date, maybe we'll play it. It's only about 20 seconds, but we'll save it for another day. But for today, success with 988, as with any public intervention, should be measured by how we serve the most vulnerable among us. Consider the young Black people, for example, represent the fastest rising demographic for suicide in our country. And 988, among other things, is about suicide prevention and intervention. And while we acknowledge that 23% of people killed by law enforcement historically have been identified as having a mental illness, and that is unacceptable and moves us to action, we also know that according to the Washington Post police shooting database, Black Americans, who account for less than 13% of the population, make up nearly 1/4 of those who die at the hands of law enforcement, with over 96% of those African Americans being Black and male. Equity data priorities must focus on quantifying disparities in access and service delivery, while recognizing and acknowledging longstanding inequities. Our evaluation efforts cannot be limited to measuring average impact on the health of a whole population. Our interventions and our message should, in fact, be informed by multiple rounds of market research that oversample for historically marginalized communities. We have a responsibility to set an expectation that resources allocated for 988 and for expanding mental health resources will be utilized to serve populations that reflect their community's demographics. Utilize these data as part of a feedback loop, along with technical assistance to continually push toward equity and accountability. A successful data strategy will identify the underlying social inequities and the resources needed to afford all impacted individuals a fair and just opportunity to achieve their healthiest outcome. 988 represents a long past due opportunity to shift from a law enforcement and justice system response to one of immediately connecting to care for individuals in suicidal, mental health, and substance use crisis in individuals where they live, work, play, and pray. This represents an opportunity to make a fundamental shift in how people in crisis, all people in crisis, are engaged in our communities. And that is Strong Talk. Stay tuned for the Strong Talk podcast coming soon.
Thank you so much. I so much look forward to this segment, in part because of the strength you bring behind it, but also its connection back to what I'm very hopeful about, and that is SAMHSA's overarching theme of making sure that equity is interwoven in all of the things that we do. So bringing this point up as you have, continue on, my friend, because I really love this segment and look forward to stealing a lot of it from you to share with other people as we go across the country and talk to the States.
Thank you, Brian. I do want to let everyone know that coming on January 4th, I will have a guest presenter for this 2 minutes of Strong Talk, Preston Mitchum from the Trevor Project will be the guest presenter on January 4th. So I encourage everyone to tune in for that. I don't know if you have the ability to play the Strong Talk music as our closing music or not. I don't know if you have the
What's the word? What's the word? Strong talk, strong talk. What's the word? Word. Strong talk. What's the word? Yeah. Okay, looking for a safe space where healing might take place, where everyone is valued, given tools to maintain.
You ask and it is given, sir. Thank you again so much. And again, a reminder on Moving America's Soul and Suicide, episode 7. Remember Kana and her daughter, just powerful. Just a reminder that these episodes continue, and Moving America's Soul and Suicide. So keep those pieces in mind. And as we close out today, I want to remind you again that there'll be no Crisis Jam next week or the week after. We will reconvene on January 4th. And I want to let you all know that this is going to be a special edition of Crisis Jam because its focus is going to be on youth and young adult services. So believe me, you want to be a part of this. We will have in our speakers SAMHSA's Youth Crisis Guidelines with Dr. Anita Everett and Dr. Belina Shaw of SAMHSA, excuse me. And that will be on January 4th. So please join us at that time. As you can see from here, there are going to be a host of wonderful topics that are upcoming. You'll look ahead for the 11th on Trek Medics and deploying emergency responders. We are getting such a flood of wonderful topics in the Crisis Jam. You'll see that we are going forward with a number of really, really powerful topics. So to everyone, I wish you the best of holidays. Come through. We'll look for you all in the very much positive new year that is about to come. And thank you all for joining us today. And we'll see you then. Happy holidays.